Ladies, gentlemen, gamers, I have another combat guide for you guys today, and this one is for Tales of Xillia. The remaster just came out, so there should be a lot of new players on Tales of Xillia, or if you're a returning player coming back to the game and forgot a lot of the mechanics, this guide can hopefully help you become an absolute beast at the combat. Hopefully you guys find some of these tips useful and become an absolute legend at Tales of Xillia's combat by the end of this. Alright, let's start with the first one. The first section I want to talk about is playing Jude. Now, even if you chose Mila at the beginning of the game, you're of course going to get access to all the party members, and I say this a lot for Tales games. It's good to kind of learn each of them at least a little bit, so in case you need to switch on the fly in battle for someone else's specific arts or their moves, you can learn how to do that. But Jude, I would say, is the most important, even more so than Mila, and that is for one reason, and that is his snap pivot. More people than I thought actually don't know that Jude could do this, so I want to demonstrate it here. And basically, if you backstep right when the enemy swings, it's going to slide Jude around to the backside of the enemy, and then for around 2 seconds, the enemy is just going to stand there, and you could usually always break their armor and get them into a combo. This is especially helpful for bosses because a lot of the time they're going to have blue super armor, but you can break through this super armor, and snapping over to the enemy's backside is always going to break that armor. So you don't have to become a master at timing either. I would genuinely stand there blocked and backstep when the enemy swings to try to learn the timing, because even if you miss, let's say you jump too early, you're still probably going to backstep out of the way of the enemy's attack. So it's really helpful just to try to learn this, and again, if you get them correctly, you're always going to be able to get to the backside of the enemy and get them into a stagger. The next tip I want to go into is guarding. Guarding is very useful in this game. In general, I would just kind of tap the guard as you're waiting for enemies to kind of learn their attack patterns, because if you put on flash guard, which I really recommend, you're going to reduce 90% of that damage with it. And then the most cheese thing in the game, in my opinion, is TP restoration guard and HP restoration guard. Now, both of these are great to have on, but if you don't have one or the other, usually your other party member will, and since the little symbol is there for the linked attacks, if you're linked to them, it'll work for both of you. Now, what happens is if you do a flash guard, so basically guard at the perfect time, it's going to restore your health and your TP. And again, you don't need crazy timing. You could even just kind of sit there and spam it when the enemies are swinging, and you're gonna get some HP and TP restored. This is a really good move to kind of just get yourself back in order if your team is starting to lose a bunch of health. And again, I think it's better than just running straight in on a new boss and attacking them. I would guard most of the time until you learn their attacks, and yeah, most of the time, if you just attempt to perfect guard, you're gonna get your HP and TP back with these skills equipped. And then you could go even further, and if you go down on Jude's skill list, it's impregnable guard, which your guard could no longer be broken. So if you mix and match all these guard abilities, you're gonna be really strong, and it's really helpful to use your guard throughout battles. Plus, you have to hold your guard down to do the backstep to get a snap pivot and get behind the enemy. So again, something really good to practice. Now let's talk about linking with your characters, which is probably the biggest gimmick and mechanic in Tales of Xillia. It's a lot of fun, but there is better ways to use it than others. One thing a lot of people don't do is they don't ever turn it off. It's not always good to be linked the entire time in battle, and a few reasons for that is your linked partner is going to take some of the damage that you take, so if you're like linked to a mage, they're going to be taking all your damage, so it's not that good of an idea. I don't think it's that good to link with a mage like at all. I would link with more of the damage dealers, like link Jude with Alvin, because Alvin helps break armor, so that's something really good to do. But the mages, I would just leave them alone, and another reason for that is when you're linked, your teammates are going to try to go around the enemy with you and combo them, right? So if you want them to cast spells the whole time, they're actually going to do that less if you're linked. So I would leave the mages unlinked so they could just be in their little corner reviving people, healing people, and if you want to do a linked art with them, then you could connect to them and do it really quick. Some situations it's really good to link is if there's only one enemy, it could be good to link with Mila because she could bind enemies, so sometimes she'll just hold them there while you could beat them up. As I said, Alvin is good for these sorts of things because he breaks their armor, so if you need to break a boss's armor better, he's good to link up with. Again, I would leave the mages alone. I really haven't found too many scenarios where it's really that good to link with them, unless, again, you're using a linked art, which we'll go into in a moment. Leia is interesting though, because I usually leave her alone so she can cast whatever spells she wants to, but she does have an ability where she steals items from downed enemies when you are linked. I would keep in mind for boss fights and like secret bosses that you find in this game, those are really good to steal items for really quickly with Leia because they usually have really rare items. So honestly, whenever you're fighting a boss and stuff, link to Leia real quick, knock the enemy down, and then you could unlink with her and go back to being solo. Now the linked arts are some of the most powerful in the game, and pretty much the whole point of this section is I'm reminding you guys to kind of be mindful of when you're linking the people and what types of linked arts you're using. Some of them could do a lot of damage. A lot of them all have elemental effects on them, so if the enemy is weak to fire and you use a fire linked art, it's going to destroy their health bar. Others with the mages will heal your entire team, like pixie heal. So again, I wouldn't really link with one of the healers, but when you have your bar and you're able to do a linked art, link to Elise real quick, use pixie heal to heal your whole team, and then unlink with her. Things like that. If you go into the arts section of your menu, you could click R2 and it will show all the different linked art combinations and explain what they do. There's a lot of one-on-one enemy arts, a lot of AoE attacks. So again, if you want to do one that's like beating the crap out of one enemy, use it when you're locked onto one enemy. If there's a bunch of enemies circling you, use a linked art that's going to do a giant AoE explosion and knock them all down. You know, a bunch of things like that. Remember, you could always hold R1 in the middle of battle and it will show what the enemies are weak to. So once you know that and you already know some of your linked arts are, let's say, strong with rock, then you want to use those on the enemy that's weak to them and you're going to do a lot of damage. The last tip for linked arts is over limit. So when your linked art gauge is full, when you activate one of these linked arts, it's going to start ticking down with a timer. And in that time, you could do as many linked arts as you want instead of just one. So when this is going down, you're gonna have a bunch memorized by this point, but I would switch through the characters to try to get as many as you can. Basically, you just input the next button before your attack ends, and it's gonna go into the next linked art. So let's say you click X and you did Demon Fang and now you're doing a linked art, you could do left and to the right X and it's going to wait for your next move to then chain it out. And you'll just keep going back and forth, and then even in the middle of this, you can use your D-pad to switch to a different partner and then use their moves. So you could basically keep linked arts going until this entire bar depletes. And this is like really good for doing a bunch of crazy attacks, and then maybe at the very end you switch to a healer and do a pixie heal or a buff that makes your whole team extra strong. You know, things like that is a really good way to use it. Now the next section is a pretty easy tip, but it's to get more XP. So whenever you're going to your next objective, you're going to be running through a lot of these big open areas with a bunch of enemies and items scattered around. I would always keep a bunch of XP food items. So we could go to food shops and get a whole bunch of things. There's some really useful ones, like it raises your attack or defense, it gives you more money, you know, a bunch of things like that. But you're going to be going through these sections where you just walk through a bunch of enemies before you reach your destination so many times that I would always keep an XP food item active. Every time you activate it, you could also bring two enemies next to each other, and it's going to create a linked battle where you're just going to get more enemies and more XP, and this is way faster than going from one battle to the next. You could also cheese them and football juke them and run to the back, and if you hit them in the back, you're going to start the battle with them taking damage or being dizzy. So every time you're in one of these sections where you're heading to your next objective and there's a bunch of enemies and you're going through these areas, pop an XP food item, gather some enemies together and beat them up that way, and you're going to pretty much be over leveled through the whole game. The next tip is when it comes to weapons and shops. Whenever you go to a shop, you could expand each of these shops, which basically the more you level up a certain section, like items, armor, or weapons, you're just going to keep getting new, better ones. I would really prioritize weapons because it's just going to keep you really strong through the game. You could also prioritize armor a little bit, but if you're so strong from your weapons, you're basically going to be taking out enemies, and then all of the guarding abilities and stuff I taught you earlier in the video, you're going to be a master at guarding and pivot snapping by the time you get to these points that you don't really need super armor, but your weapons can be really strong. Another thing is, you know how there's elemental weaknesses? A lot of these weapons have elements on them. So I wouldn't only hold one pair of weapons. Like, let's say Jude has fire gloves and water gloves. I would keep those in your inventory with normal gloves, because if you're fighting a boss that's, say, weak to fire, and you put those fire gloves on, every hit you do is going to be a power hit, and that's really useful. And the last tip I want to give is down to boss behavior. So every time you're fighting a boss in this game, or a really strong enemy, when you're comboing them, eventually it's going to show this blue exclamation point, and that means they're about to swing back and retaliate at you. The way this works is actually based more on the amount of times you hit them, not the damage. So whenever you're staggering a boss, like you get a snap pivot, get behind him, and start beating him up, I would use arts that are quick and do high damage, not arts that keep the combo going. For weaker enemies, or just in general, like maybe more human-sized enemies and things like that, you can combo longer, sure, go ahead. Use the arts that are going to basically combo them with a bunch of hits. But since they break out of your attacks the more times you hit them, when it comes to big bosses or challenging bosses, when you get them into a stagger, it's actually better to use much faster, higher damage dealing arts, because they're not going to break out of it, and you're going to get much more damage on them, and it also shortens the time so you can get back into blocking or dodging again, because if you're stuck in a giant 10-hit combo that you just used with your arts, they're going to break out with that exclamation point and then knock you down. So that's a quick little tip for bosses. It's based on how many times you hit them, they're going to swing back at you, not the damage. So you could really use this to your advantage to shoot out a bunch of quick arts that just do a bunch of high damage. And those are all the main tips I think are very useful as you go through Tales of Xillia to make yourself an absolute beast at the combat system by the end of the game. Any super boss you want to take on, if you practice all these things, you're going to be able to take it on at the end of the game. Mark my words. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this Tales of Xillia Remastered combat guide. It would really appreciate it if you left a like on the video. Let me know your feedback down below. What can I do to make the videos better? Did it help you guys out? And I hope you guys are enjoying Tales of Xillia in general. It's a really cool Tales game, and I'm excited to see all the other older games get remastered very soon here. So hope you guys have a fantastic day. Hopefully this video was helpful, and I'll see you in another one very soon. Peace.